questions about the panic of 1873? So we talked about that financial collapse and all sort of the recipes for economic depression, like bank failure, over speculation of land and commodities, reckless lending, high rates of unemployment. Jay Cook and Company, the guy on the left, that was that massive bank that collapsed. Do you remember how he got wealthy during the Civil War? He's not, but he did something to make a pile of money during the war.
It's not the railroad.
He actually moves, take care. He moves a ton of his money into the railroad. In fact, that's what his bank is going to do. They're going to finance the Northern Pacific. Let's bring it down here so we can learn this. All right.
Wait, it's not that big project, right?
It's something that's sold during wartime.
Oh, war bonds.
War bonds, very good. He got wealthy off selling war bonds. And he was just taking a fraction of the percentages.
What are war bonds?
That's a really good question. So here's the premise of the war bond. The premise of a war bond is I tell you, hey, I'm going to sell you this bond. You give me your money. I give your money to the government. You have this bond. You hang on to that bond. You need to hang on to it for a while until it matures. And then any years after, so like let's say it's a 10-year bond. So you're waiting on like what you probably hear on like Marketplace Morning Report, like the 10-year yield, right? So you're going to want to hang on to that war bond for like a 10-year period, because if you take it out before 10 years, then you're going to actually lose money. So you got to wait for 10 years, and then after 10 years, you sit on it and you let the value grow by compounded interest, right? So if I'm going around selling all the bonds, like clearly the government needs people to sell them, well, I'm going to get a fraction of the commission on the bond sale. So that's how this guy got really wealthy. He made millions just selling bonds during the war. But this is a really kind of important thing that I don't know if we got into. This is a transcontinental rail line. It's not the original, it's not the Union and Central Pacific, but it is the Northern Pacific. And what we've already kind of talked about is these railroad speculators over-speculated on the cost of jobs and these sort of land grants and land subsidies. There's such a large problem with corruption sort of from the beginning of Reconstruction during that era of Andrew Johnson, but especially in the first Grant administration and even into the second Grant administration, that when the Jay Cook Company fell apart and a lot of the Pacific Railway stockholders who had stock that they were like, yeah, the stock's really worth a lot of money, but the stock prices were watered, is what we call over-speculated stock prices, and the bottom fell out. Well, a lot of people lost everything. The irony of all this is that the Northern Pacific wasn't going anywhere, right? They needed to complete that rail line to connect the, north of the Mississippi to the Pacific. So this is like that, all of you have been in an economics class, or you currently are in an economics class. We all know that markets are volatile, but we also know that markets are cyclical. So it's like, as much as you're going to have a boom, you're going to have a bust. A lot of times we call a bust a correction. So the market was corrected here. This is a pretty substantial financial panic. It takes a 4 to 6 year period to get out of this particular panic. We're actually not very far away from an even worse panic that's going to occur in 1893 that we're going to talk about at the end of this particular lesson. So, as we talked about last class, gold, silver, and greenbacks are a big discussion. And the premise here is that the common person wanted their money, the dollars in their pocket, their greenbacks, they wanted them to be backed by both gold and silver, because this allowed for more liquid cash. It also allowed for maybe a little bit of stability in the marketplace. Some argued that it was false stability because it went away from, took away from the value of the gold standard. Clearly the tycoons don't want to move off any type of gold standard. Why? Why would the wealthy not want to move away from it? Yeah, it's going to hurt their pocketbook. Not to mention, what do we know about these tycoons? What do we know about the J.P. Morgans of this era and the Vanderbilts? Yeah, they have monopolies. So what do they have? They hold on to a few. Give me an example of a few things that they hold on to. They hold on to plenty of commodities. Very good. They hold on to lots of what else? Land. Excellent. And they also hold on to a lot of bullion. They have a lot of gold. They have a lot of silver. They hold on to that. They don't want to see the value of gold depleted because that hurts their commodity value and it hurts their land value. So that hurts their bottom line. So this is really about it's kind of a class war. So the Silverite coalition sort of come about, and what the Silverites want, they want a 16-to-1 ratio of 16 ounces of silver equal to the value of 1 ounce of gold. And what it ultimately leads to is really a law that kind of helps move the country out of this panic, and it's going to be the Coinage Act of 1873. Why would a Coinage Act be helpful? Meaning that you're going to actually coin gold and silver. Any ideas? What would a Coinage Act help with? If I said, we are going to mint the gold and silver. Yes, very good. It helps with inflation. Excellent job, all right? So the Silverites sort of get a little bit of what they want, and what it ultimately leads to is the formation of a new political party movement known as the Greenback Party. The Greenback Party wants bimetallism. They want the dollar to be backed on both gold and silver. And they actually get such a significant movement that they get a nominee for president in the election of 1876 that you're familiar with, Peter Cooper. Does that name ring a bell? Should, because we talked about him last semester. He invented the American locomotive, the Tom Thumb, and he also invented what else? A delicious snack that some of you may have eaten as a child. Maybe not. I don't feed my kids this, but I was fed this all the time when I was a kid. Jello. Does anybody eat Jello? No. Yeah. My grandmother raised me on Jello. I don't even make Jello for my kids. What's that? What's that? Oh, so Jello. Enough about Peter Cooper and Jello and the Tom Thumb. Grant has another plan to get the country out of the Depression, and that's called the Resumption Act of 1875. Pledged that the government would further withdraw greenbacks and allow you to redeem your paper money for gold at face value starting in 1879. Why is that a good idea? What will people, they'll draw back the printing of more money, but people are more inclined to do what with their cash? Yeah, they're more inclined to potentially use their cash. It might be in circulation. They might even save their cash. This might prevent a problem that occurred during panics known as bank runs, where people would like run on a bank, pull all their money out. If people were willing to stick around and hang onto their cash and maybe even put it into banks until 1879, then that might help pull the country out. Another act that helped with the correction of the market at this period of time was the Bland-Allison Act in 1878. It basically had the Treasury coin between $2 million and $4 million worth of silver bullion each month. Rutherford B. Hayes was opposed to the act, but Congress overrode the veto of Hayes, and the civil rights were thrilled by this. So as greenbacks regained their value toward the end of this depressionary era, when the redemption day came in 1879, most people just hung on to their cash and didn't redeem for gold. So in the end, not everybody, but some people that were behind that movement, it all kind of came to fruition the way that they had hoped. This is what the green dollar looked like back then. That's what the greenback looked like. This is another cartoon from Puck. I think it's a pretty hilarious cartoon. It's got the Silverite coalition riding wildly on a Democratic Party on a Democratic donkey, the symbol of the Democrats, running recklessly down off the cliff that says "Abyss of Political Mania," and the name of the cartoon, "Gone Crazy." Sound money Democrats. So this leads us to another part of the story, and that is the Republicans and the Democratic parties at this period of time became splintered, right? There are different people with different points of view. Not every Democrat believed that there should be bimetallism. Some Democrats believe that there should be a more conservative approach with a gold standard. So we're going to talk a little bit about those divisions as we move forward. So the Gilded Age comes from Mark Twain. You guys did a really good job with that when we discussed it earlier. Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner wrote this novel. They co-authored it. It's sort of a term that, like, everything looked great on the surface, but on the inside it was tarnished. It wasn't real. It looked opulent and exquisite on the outside, but on the inside there was a lot of poverty. Civil rights were being ripped away. Democracy seemed to be a bit of a sham. Furthermore, the South is starting to regain control of their governments through reentry, through Jim Crow, and ultimately through the Compromise of 1877. That also led to the theory of the Gilded Age. That on the outside it appeared that African Americans were gaining rights, but the reality of it was all those rights were going to be ripped away in the American South. And sadly, as African Americans try to make their way west or north to find freedom and opportunity, Jim Crow follows. Republicans are very much divided. And what divided the Republican Party really is the American Civil War. People came up with different ideology through the war, and what splintered them even further was the era of Reconstruction. So not everybody was wholeheartedly behind Grant. They obviously had to get under the umbrella to get him elected. But by Grant's second election, there were a group of liberal Republicans and Democrats that had come together to back Horace Greeley. Grant won the election, but it just shows you the fracture that occurred in these parties. The Republicans were splintered even farther. Roscoe Conkling led the Stalwarts. This was a group that believed in patronage and nepotism and the spoil system. They believed that jobs should go to cronies and sort of crony politics, when the jobs should go to supporters. As opposed to James G. Blaine, he led the group of Republicans known as what were called the half-breeds, meaning they had some of that political sort of idealism of the Republican Party that came out of the moderate Republican, or sort of somewhere between moderate and radical Republican. But that half-breed idea comes over to the Democratic side, where they're like, all right, we've got some more old ideals of the Republican Party, but we also believe that people should get jobs through merit. And that really, the civil service, merit-based job reform became one of the biggest battles during this era. Again, a lot of it comes down to patronage, civil service, and we're going to talk more about that division as we move forward. Here's Mark Twain, father of American the American satire and humorist movement. And then we have a political cartoon related to the Gilded Age. So this is pretty much, I'm going to get through this and then we'll kind of pump the brakes for the day. But I want to take a look at the election of 1876. Grant nearly ran for a third term, but the corruption and the scandal and the panic of 1873 sort of pulled him back. Also, by this point, Grant's health's not too good. Grant was, he smoked like 20 cigars a day. So he ended up with throat cancer, and that's how he passed away. So what this is going to lead to is what is sort of known as the last battle of the Civil War. Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes, Civil War veteran, Civil War general, and Samuel Tilden, Bourbon Democrat. As I said, the Democrats are going to be splintered as well. Bourbon Democrat, New York governor, and the guy that broke up the Boss Tweed ring with the help of Thomas Nast. This is one of the closest elections in American history. The electoral and the popular vote split down the middle 50-50. But votes in 4 of the southern states, and keep in mind, this is the first presidential election the South's been involved in a while. Louisiana, some southern states were involved in Grant's second election, and I guess a few in his first, but not many. Louisiana, South Carolina, Florida, and part of Oregon out west were unsure and disputed. So there is a joint committee session made up of 15 members that are going to decide who the next president, the 19th president, will be. Do keep in mind, Peter Cooper of Locomotive and Jello fame is your third-party candidate, but not really a factor. He doesn't win in the electoral vote. This becomes known as the fraud of the century, and Rutherford B. Hayes gets the nickname Rutherford B. Hayes. You can see there on the election map the important significance of the American South re-entering the presidential election. Another Nast cartoon for you. It says the electoral vote. Now let us look at it from another angle or another view, and it's got Uncle Sam reading the Constitution upside down. So what this ultimately leads to is the Compromise of 1877 and the end of Reconstruction. The Electoral Count Act was passed. The 15 men were selected from the Senate, the House, and the Supreme Court to count the votes. This became a backroom deal with a very narrow vote between the two candidates. It's also a compromise between, yet again, the North and the South. The South wants to regain control of their local and state governments. They want all southern states to be able to re-enter the Union, and they want to do away with military occupation. So the way this deal is struck is the South will get all of that back. They will also get the opportunity, subsidies, and land grants for a southern transcontinental rail line to be built from Texas to the Pacific, and military rule will end in the American South. This became known as the Compromise of 1877. But one of the really tragic and tarnished sort of parts of this compromise is that African Americans are left out of the picture. And I talked about this before. If you look at the year of 1877, at the local, state, federal level, there are several hundred African Americans in elected office. By 1880, only 3 African Americans will hold office at the state and federal level. So this is a pretty tragic leads to a tragic impact and sweeping Jim Crow laws at local and state levels. And now we kind of come back to that age-old question that we've been talking, not age-old, but that's maybe not dramatic, but very old question. States' rights, 10th Amendment. Now that they regain control, do they have the state's right to limit the rights of African Americans? Are those rights not protected in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment? And that's the direction we're going to go in on the next time that I see you guys. So this is where we're going to wrap up for today. Another Thomas Nast cartoon from Harper's Weekly. The former Confederate shaking hands with the wounded Union soldier. Lady Liberty with her broken sword, crying over the grave of the Union heroes and the useless war. Up on the left-hand side, the American flag flying upside down. You know what that symbol means? It's a symbol of distress. Here, old Confederate flag flying, and then we just have devastation and wreckage in the background. Question? Sure can. All right. So,